and medical equipment. Mr. Speaker, the containment measures instituted by the government to stem the spread of the virus and save lives adversely affected economic activities and revenue performance. To stimulate economic activities and enhance government's ability to respond, we prioritized health and social expenditures and formulated an economic recovery strategy program that targeted, first, enhancing our ability to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, reducing debt vulnerabilities through a revenue-driven fiscal consolidation with a view to stabilizing debt to GDP ratio over the medium term. Third, implementing targeted policy, legal and institutional reforms, while at the same time addressing vulnerabilities in the state-owned enterprises worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. And fourth, strengthening the monetary policy framework and financial stability. Mr. Speaker, under this program, we plan to reduce the level of fiscal deficit from 8.7% of GDP in the current budget to 7.5% of GDP in the financial 2021-22, and further to 3.6% of GDP in the financial year 2024-25. This will be a 5.1% reduction in fiscal deficit over the next 4 years, thereby slowing the annual growth of debt. Upon our request, this economic recovery program is supported by multilateral and bilateral development partners, with the International Monetary Fund providing financial resources amounting to US $2.34 billion over the next 3 years. Further, Mr. Speaker, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the G20 countries extended support to developing countries by offering debt service suspension under the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative framework. The fiscal space created under this initiative is to increase social, health, and economic spending in response to the COVID-19 crisis. Kenya has benefited from this initiative through expansion of health and social services. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, Kenya welcomes the initiatives under the recent French-African Summit that agreed to, among others, increase funding through the IMF special drawing rights to African states to support economic recovery, extension of the G20 debt service suspension, and facilitate the manufacture of vaccines in Africa. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight the economic policy context in which this budget has been prepared. Mr. Speaker, this year's budget has been prepared against a backdrop of projected global economic recovery. This is despite the emergence of COVID-19 variant, occasioning reintroduction of containment measures to further stem spread of the virus. The projected recovery reflects additional fiscal support in a few large economies and monetary easing that further uplifts the economic outlook. This outlook is further supported by the ongoing vaccinations, which is expected to pick up in the second half of 2021. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, the global economy is projected to grow by 6% in 2021 from a contraction of 3.3% in 2020. Mr. Speaker, closer home, due to improved exports and commodity prices, economic growth in the sub-Saharan Africa region is projected to expand by 3.4% in 2021 from a contraction of 1.9% in 2020. This growth will also be supported by recovery in both private consumption and investment as the economies reopen. Mr. Speaker, like the rest of the world, our economy was not spared from the adverse impact of the pandemic. In addition, the Kenyan economy experienced two other shocks. One, the invasion of the desert locusts that damaged crops, and two, floods that caused loss of lives and livelihoods, displacement of people, and destruction of infrastructure. Given the impact of these shocks, economic growth for 2020 declined to 0.6% from 5.4% in 2019. Mr. Speaker, economic growth is expected to rebound to 6.6% in 2021. This recovery reflects the lower base of 2020, when most services sectors were adversely affected by the closure of the economy, recording negative growth. The outlook in 2021 will be reinforced by the prevailing stable macroeconomic environment and the ongoing implementation of the strategic priorities of government under the Big Four agenda and economic recovery strategy. Weather conditions are expected to be favorable supporting agricultural output. As a result, export of goods and services will expand as global demand normalizes. Over the medium term, the economy is expected to remain resilient and grow at a rate above 6.1%. Mr. Speaker, this growth outlook is affirmed by the recent surveys by the Monetary Policy Committee, revealing a general optimism about economic growth prospects. In addition, the recent IMF mission to Kenya noted that economic recovery is underway and estimates economic growth consistent with our projections. Mr. Speaker, to support this growth outlook, we shall continue to maintain macroeconomic stability. Inflation, which stood at 5.9% in May 2021, is expected to remain within the target range of 5%, with a margin of 2.5 on either side, supported by prudent fiscal and monetary policies. Interest rates will be expected to remain low and stable, supporting growth of private sector credit. The balance of payments is also expected to be strong, with the current account balance projected to remain at 5.2% of GDP. Further, the rebound in horticulture and tea exports, as well as increased inflows of remittances, will support build-up of adequate levels of official foreign exchange reserves, creating buffers against short-term shocks in the foreign exchange market. Mr. Speaker, the affirmation economic outlook may be affected by emerging domestic and external risks. The emergence of new COVID-19 variants could lead to reinstatement of containment measures, disrupting, among others, trade and tourism. In addition, Mr. Speaker, adverse weather conditions could lead to low agricultural output. Further, increased public expenditure pressures, particularly wage demands, could put a strain to the fiscal space. Mr. Speaker, the government will continue to monitor these developments and take appropriate policy interventions to safeguard the economy where the risks to materialize. Mr. Speaker, having outlined the economic policy context for this budget, we have carefully reflected on a theme that will resonate with our strategies to protect lives and livelihoods during this period of COVID-19, cushion the vulnerable, and support economic recovery for employment creation and poverty reduction. In this respect, we have framed the theme for this budget as building back better, a strategy for resilient and sustainable economic recovery and inclusive growth. Mr. Speaker, the next section of my statement will give highlights of the policy priorities of the government and the strategy for economic recovery. I will later provide highlights of the fiscal framework underpinning the budget, spending priorities, and the proposed tax policy measures. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of Big Four agenda remains a high priority and critical to the economic recovery. In this regard, the government will fast-track implementation of programs and projects under the Big Four agenda to enhance food and nutritional security, achieve universal health care, provide affordable housing, and support growth of manufacturing sector for job creation. Mr. Speaker, the government will also undertake the following targeted strategic interventions to achieve a resilient and sustainable economic recovery. First, maintain a macroeconomic stability and enhance security to foster a secure and conducive business environment and security of Kenyans and their properties. Second, scale up development of critical infrastructure in the country such as roads, rail, energy, and water to reduce the cost of doing business and ease movement of people and goods, as well as promote competitiveness. Third, enhance investment in key economic sectors for broad-based sustainable recovery by promoting agricultural transformation, growth in manufacturing, environmental conservation and water supply, stimulating tourism recovery, and sustainable land use and management. Fourth, expand access to quality social services in health, education, and appropriate social safety nets for the vulnerable population. Fifth, support the youth, women, and persons living with disability through government-funded empowerment programs that leverages on partnerships with the private sector organization. Sixth, support county governments through transfer of shareable revenues to strengthen their systems and capacity in service delivery. And lastly, implement various policy legal and institutional reforms to enhance efficiency of public service delivery. Mr. Speaker, following the outbreak of the pandemic, we implemented the Economic Stimulus Program to support economic activities and mitigate the adverse impact of the pandemic on Kenyans and businesses. The achievement of the program includes: 1, creation of over 100,000 jobs opportunities for the youth under the Kazi Mtaani initiative and 5,500 community scouts in wildlife conservation areas across the 47 counties. 2, improvement of education outcomes through construction of additional classrooms in secondary schools, procurement of locally fabricated desks for both primary and secondary schools, and recruitment of 4,000 and 8,000 primary and secondary school intern teachers, respectively. 3, enhancement of healthcare system capacity by recruiting 5,000 diploma and certificate level healthcare workers for 1 year under the universal health coverage. 4, enhancement of liquidity to businesses through payment of VAT refunds of shilling 10 billion and clearance of pending bills of shilling 13.1 billion. 5, de-risking of lending to micro, small, and medium enterprises by providing shilling 3 billion to the Credit Guarantee Scheme as a seed capital. And 6, cushioning the vulnerable, particularly the emerging urban vulnerable, with an additional shilling 10 billion to the cash transfer program. Mr. Speaker, building on the success of the aforementioned interventions, the government is now set to implement an elaborate economic recovery strategy that aims to reposition the economy on an inclusive and sustainable growth trajectory. The strategy seeks to enhance resource mobilization to ensure sustainable funding of our development programs from diverse sources, including public-private partnership and lease financing. The strategy will also support the role of the private sector in the economy and further facilitate credit access by micro, small, and medium enterprises through the Credit Guarantee Scheme. Under the strategy, the government will upscale investment in ICT and digital infrastructure in order to facilitate e-commerce and efficient delivery of public services. The government shall also promote local production processes and domestic supply value chains and strengthen social protection through targeted policy interventions and programs. Mr. Speaker, undoubtedly, successful implementation of this strategy will enable us realize the aspired economic growth, create employment, and narrow income inequalities. I will later in this statement propose budget allocations to the government priority areas. Mr. Speaker, besides the achievements under the Economic Stimulus Program, the ongoing key strategic interventions of government, as well as sustained policy reforms over the years, have greatly transformed the economy and improved the welfare of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight some of the key achievements realized from these investments and reforms. Mr. Speaker, at the macroeconomic level, our prudent fiscal, monetary, and financial policies have resulted into fast, strong economic growth that averaged at 5.6% between 2013 and 2019. However, the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic slowed growth in the year 2020. The GDP per capita increased by an impressive 80.4% from shilling 113,000 in 2013 to shilling 204,000 in 2019. New jobs created by both the formal and the informal sector increased by 12%, from 755,000 in 2013 to 846,000 in 2019. Second, inflation rate has remained within target range, averaging 6.1%. Third, interest rates have declined while credit to the private sector increased. Lending rates declined from 17.3% in 2013 to 12% in 2020, while the central bank rate declined from 8.5% in 2013 to 7% in 2020. As a result, credit to the private sector increased from shilling 1.5 trillion in 2013 to shilling 2.8 trillion in 2020. Fourth, the current account deficit improved from 8.8% of GDP in 2013 to 4.7% of GDP in 2020, supporting the stability of the foreign exchange market. And fifth, revenue collection, including appropriation in aid, doubled from Kenya shilling 900 billion in the financial 2013-2014 to an estimated Kenya shilling 1.8 trillion in the financial 2020-21. Mr. Speaker, our investment in the expansion of road networks, railways, seaports, airports, and energy has enhanced domestic and regional connectivity, boosted rural productivity, and reduced urban congestion. These investments include: 1, the standard gauge railway and the urban commuter rail in Nairobi, the ongoing rehabilitation of meter gauge railway lines along various routes, including Nairobi-Nanyuki and Nakuru-Kisumu-Butere. 2, the recently launched first batch in Lamu Port as a critical pillar of the Lapsset corridor. Our focus to make Lamu a free port for both domestic and transshipment purposes. In addition, the government is establishing a disease-free zone in Lamu to support export of live animals and processed meat. 3, the rehabilitation and subsequent use of Kisumu Port will enhance efficiency in regional trade. And 4, expansion in energy generation and connectivity with over 7.5 million households today connected to electricity compared to 2.3 million households in 2013. Mr. Speaker, the government has provided various incentives at our ports, including exempting the fuel supply to the shipping lines from import and excise duty, VAT, as well as railway development levy and import declaration fees. To further attract more ships to our ports, particularly to the recently launched Lamu Port, the government will review the arrangements on fueling by vessels calling at the Kenyan ports, with a view to allowing ship-to-ship refueling and establishment of fuel bunker facilities. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the various reforms in the agricultural sector, we focus on the livestock sector by reviving the Kenya Meat Commission. We shall set up a meat processing plant in Lamu to provide ready market for livestock, increase income to farmers, and enhance the meat value chain. Mr. Speaker, we also focused on increasing fish production by refurbishing Liwatoni Fishing Complex and setting up a new fish processing plant in Lamu. This will promote exports and increase incomes for the local fishermen. Mr. Speaker, in order to improve access to land as a factor for development, we have stepped up investment in the sector and rolled out ambitious national program of land titling and digitization of land records. Mr. Speaker, tea and coffee subsectors provide livelihoods to millions of Kenyans. Despite its contribution, the foreign exchange earnings, the returns to farmers have been declining due to low productivity, high input cost, low levels of value addition, and weak regulatory and institutional framework. Under the ongoing reforms in the coffee and tea sectors, I'll be proposing further measures to enhance competitiveness of these subsectors. With regard to manufacturing, Mr. Speaker, the government has revived and transformed textile, leather, and automobile industries, which have in turn created jobs for our youth. The full operationalization of special economic zones in Dongokundu, Naivasha, and Kisumu will support local industrial activities, and unlock additional employment opportunities. Mr. Speaker, the government over the years has supported local assembly of motor vehicles and motorcycles by providing various tax incentives. This includes removal of excise duty on locally assembled motor vehicles, duty-free importation of complete knockdown kits, and reduced corporate tax from 30 to 15% for the first 5 years of operation. I am pleased to note that the industry has responded positively to these interventions, and to date, we have approved 13 motor vehicle and 17 motorcycle assemblers. These local assemblers have created employment opportunities while also saving the country substantial foreign exchange. Mr. Speaker, whereas assembly of commercial vehicles have registered tremendous growth, the passenger category of motor vehicles remains underdeveloped. This category is still dominated by imported used vehicles, comprising over 70% of passenger vehicles, which is largely attributed to the high cost of assembly. In this regard, the government is working on a framework to support the assembly of affordable passenger vehicles. Further, the government, in consultation with the stakeholders, is in the final stages of instituting comprehensive policy and administrative reforms to fully entrench local assembly of motor vehicles and motorcycles. Mr. Speaker, while we have made tremendous progress as a nation, we remain alive to the structural constraints that impede the pace of economic development, aware that a resilient and sustainable economic recovery is indeed predicated on timely implementation of appropriate policy, legal, and institutional reforms. I propose the following interventions to improve the business environment, increase efficiency in public service delivery, and strengthen accountability and transparency in public finance management. On procurement, Mr. Speaker, this House approved the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Regulation 2020 that came into effect in July 2020. With this regulation, it's now easier for procuring entities to meet the specified requirements of bilateral and multilateral agreements on technology and knowledge transfer, local content, and employment quotas, among others. For smooth implementation of the regulations, we have conducted capacity building in all 47 counties. I therefore direct procuring entities to fully comply with these regulations. Mr. Speaker, in order to ensure efficiency in procurement process and facilitate access by micro, small, and medium enterprises, the government has reviewed consolidation policy on procurement of ICT equipment and related services. In this regard, procurement of ICT equipment and related services will be decentralized to various ministries, departments, and agencies with effect from 1st July 2021. Mr. Speaker, last year, we began the process of automating public procurement through an end-to-end electronic procurement system. So far, we have developed an implementation strategy that re-engineers all public procurement processes, including functional and technical requirements. In order to actualize this initiative, 31st December 2021 will be the final date for rolling out the electronic government procurement system and therefore discontinuation of the manual procurement processes. In this regard, the government will realize savings as a result of greater efficiency, reduce operational costs, enhance transparency and accountability through increased bidding participation. Mr. Speaker, to support our local contractors and undertake construction of infrastructure projects, we have proposed changes to the contracting framework through the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Bill 2020. The bill before this House proposes, among others, to allow award of contract to multiple bidders. This indeed will support local firms and accelerate the delivery of services. Mr. Speaker, given the prevailing business environment due to the adverse impact of COVID-19 pandemic, there's an urgent need to evaluate the financial position and governance of key state corporations and institutions. It is in this respect that the government is exploring targeted reforms to strengthen these institutions, including public universities. Mr. Speaker, in the interim, the government provided financial support to strategic institutions, including Kenya Airways, Kenya Power and Lighting Company, and Postal Corporations of Kenya, which were indeed in dire need of cash to meet critical obligations. Mr. Speaker, we have developed a robust information management system to strengthen the statutory role of the National Treasury in financial and operational oversight, as well as the financial risk analysis for state corporations. Mr. Speaker, you may recall that the government introduced cost sharing in public universities in the year 1991. At that time, government funding to public universities per year was set at Kenya shilling 120,000 per student. Of this, government capitation per student was Kenya shilling 70,000, while students contributed Kenya shilling 50,000 through loan funding from Higher Education Loans Board, out of which Kenya shilling 16,000 catered for tuition fees. This is less than half of tuition fees paid currently by students in various colleges of technical and vocational education and training institutions. The ideal cost of training a student in a university has increased from Kenya shilling 120,000 to about Kenya shilling 200,000 per year, and therefore the prevailing funding arrangement introduced in 1991 is unsustainable. Under the current arrangement, universities have not only experienced financial constraints, but have also been unable to continuously honor their statutory obligations. Mr. Speaker, in order to ensure sustainability and self-reliance of public universities, the Ministry of Education is expected to engage stakeholders beginning July 2021 with a view to addressing this matter. Mr. Speaker, delays in payment of pending bills to businesses who provide services to both national and county government has affected liquidity and operation of these entities. In a number of cases, this has led to closure of businesses and affected livelihoods of the suppliers. Though progress was made in settlement of these bills by the national government, we still have challenges with the county government that still owe various suppliers huge amounts. In this regard, I direct government ministries, departments and agencies and the county governments to clear all their pending bills by 30th June 2021. Mr. Speaker, I urge the House to support our efforts towards enforcing compliance in payment of all verified pending bills by the county governments by backing our proposal under Article 225 of the Constitution of Kenya to temporarily stop transfers to county governments that persistently fail to comply with the directive to clear pending bills. Mr. Speaker, the financial sector has remained stable and continued to make significant contributions to the economic growth. Our commercial banks continue to expand their businesses to the neighboring markets, including recent acquisitions in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Uganda. The continued regional expansion will leverage on the trade and investment opportunities under the African Continental Free Trade Area. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, the Kenyan banking sector continued on its transformation journey that commenced 5 years ago, where the key pillar of the journey has been the strengthening of banks' business models, governance frameworks, and entrenching customer centricity in the operations. Mr. Speaker, at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic in March 2020, the banking sector moved quickly to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on staff, customers, and the public and instituted emergency measures to support business continuity, use of digital channels to mitigate COVID-19 infection risk, enhance liquidity to businesses, as well as facilitate compliance with health and safety protocols. As a result, banks continue to provide uninterrupted banking services to customers mainly through digital channels. Mr. Speaker, over the last 1 year, more than 54% of the bank loans, equivalent to Kenyan shillings 1.7 trillion, were restructured to enable borrowers navigate through the hard time due to the pandemic. As we move to the recovery phase, the banking sector will be expected to play a pivotal role in supporting the recovery of enterprises. Mr. Speaker, to spur economic recovery, additional capital investments are required. In this regard, the recently established Nairobi International Financial Center Authority will play an important role and is expected to publish, before end of December 2021, a framework for attracting investments and innovative financial services into our economy and the region. Mr. Speaker, the high cost of mortgages, land acquisition, and housing unit has limited access to affordable housing. Nevertheless, government interventions are beginning to yield the desired results for affordable housing. Significant progress has been made to enhance efficiency, transparency, and certainty in land matters by re-engineering the land registration processes, digitization of land records, and implementation of the Sectional Properties Act. The government is also in the process of streamlining and simplifying the legal and regulatory process governing the housing sector and providing basic infrastructure services to developers. Further, the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company is supporting the growth of residential housing market in Kenya by providing long-term funding to the mortgage lenders in order to increase affordability of mortgage loans to Kenyans. As of December 2020, Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company had refinanced 1,400 affordable housing loans worth shilling 2.75 billion. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company is scheduled to issue an infrastructure bond by October 2021 to raise additional financing for its affordable housing finance objective. Consequently, the company plans to issue green bonds to finance climate-friendly housing projects. Mr. Speaker, during the current financial year, the government operationalized the credit guarantee scheme by providing seed capital of shilling 3 billion to de-risk lending to micro, small, and medium enterprises. To this effect, the National Treasury signed credit guarantee agreements with 7 commercial banks who have now rolled out credit to micro, small, and medium enterprises. Mr. Speaker, to further promote access to affordable credit by micro, small, and medium enterprises, the government has committed to progressively raise the capital to shilling 10 billion. In this budget, I propose to allocate an additional shilling 2 billion to the scheme. Mr. Speaker, alongside the credit guarantee scheme, on account of improved business environment, the private sector has rolled out other innovative credit products targeting micro, small, and medium enterprises. Through these innovations, the banking sector had disbursed over shilling 20.8 billion to micro, small, and medium enterprises, equivalent to 0.7% of total gross loans by end of April 2021. Mr. Speaker, in order to unlock the full potential of digital lenders, the government has, through the Central Bank of Kenya Amendment Bill 2021, proposed to provide for licensing of digital credit service providers. This bill has been submitted to this House for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, capital markets play a critical role of channeling national savings and foreign capital inflows into the productive sectors. In order to enhance inclusivity and access to investment opportunities in the capital markets, I propose to amend the Central Depository Act to allow for opening of omnibus investment accounts by persons investing on behalf of others in the securities market. This will allow investment by individuals as well as collective investment by groups. Further, to improve efficiency in our capital markets and ensure fair administrative actions by the Capital Markets Authority, I propose to amend the Capital Markets Act to enable the Capital Markets Tribunal to hear and determine any appeal within 90 days. Mr. Speaker, following the Kenya Bankers Association and other industry players, we shall establish an electronic over-the-counter secondary market platform for government securities. This platform will help in deepening our domestic debt market, improve pricing efficiency and transparency in securities trading, thereby lowering yields and cost of credit in the economy. We expect the operations of the over-the-counter to be in place by June 2022. Mr. Speaker, the defined benefit pension scheme for civil servants, teachers, and disciplined forces has constrained growth of pension savings and also exerted fiscal pressure on government. In order to address these twin problems, the government on 1st of January 2021 rolled out the much-awaited public service superannuation scheme that covers civil servants, teachers, and the disciplined forces aged below 45 years at the commencement of the scheme, with an option for those over 45 years to join if they elect to do so. As of April 2021, a total of 340,318 public servants had indeed joined the scheme. Mr. Speaker, in the past, the processing of payment of pension benefits to retired public servants has neither been efficient nor timely, thus denying senior citizens regular incomes. To address this, National Treasury has carried out targeted reforms, including systems reengineering and the provision of real-time pension services in all the Huduma centers countrywide. I am pleased to note that as a result of these interventions, the cumulative pension payments and pension file process increased by 40% by 31st May 2021 compared to the previous year. We expect further improvement with the planned implementation of pensions management information system late in the year. Mr. Speaker, given the disparities in the design of the various existing pension schemes and the attendant laws, it has become necessary that these laws be harmonized, hence the need for establishment of one national retirement policy. The policy currently under development seeks to achieve comprehensive pension coverage across formal and informal sectors so as to protect the interests of beneficiaries and rights of pension contributors. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, I shall be publishing the policy by December 2021. Mr. Speaker, further, to enhance good governance and improve accountability and transparency in the management of retirement benefit schemes, I propose to amend the Retirement Benefits Act to provide for the registration and regulation of corporate trustees that provide services to pension schemes. Mr. Speaker, our retired citizens have continued to experience challenges in accessing Medicare. For this reason, we have developed post-retirement medical regulations to allow members to make additional voluntary contributions to a medical fund. This will enable retirees access the funds at the retirement or transfer a portion of it to a medical insurance provider. However, the existing regulations exclude post-retirement medical funds established under irrevocable trust by employers and service providers outside the retirement benefit scheme, popularly known as the standalone post-retirement medical funds. These funds have remained unregulated, thus adversely exposing members' funds. As such, I propose to amend the Retirement Benefits Act to provide for regulation of these funds. Mr. Speaker, majority of Kenyans in the informal sector are not covered by any pension scheme, making them vulnerable during old age. To address this, I undertook last year to establish a national informal sector pension scheme with a sustainable model that combines long-term savings with short-term needs, targeting the more than 15 million in the informal sector workers who have been excluded from the current pension arrangement. To this effect, I wish to report that necessary instruments to operationalize the scheme, including trust deeds and rules, business plan, and investment policy, have been prepared. We intend to roll out this scheme in the next financial year. Mr. Speaker, to reinforce realization of affordable housing, last year, we amended the Retirement Benefits Act and mortgage regulations to allow members to use part of their accumulated benefits to purchase residential houses. This will support members of retirement benefit schemes to own homes. In this budget, I propose to amend the mortgage regulations to allow members to utilize up to 40% or maximum of shilling 7 million of their accrued benefits to purchase a house and a tenant purchase basis by their pension scheme. Mr. Speaker, currently, foreign insurance brokers are excluded from the definition of brokers under the Insurance Act, thereby making them operate in the country without any controls, thus putting insurance and policyholders at risk. To address this, I propose to amend the Insurance Act to provide for the regulation of foreign insurance brokers. Mr. Speaker, classes of long-term insurance business were amended in 2009 to align with modern classification and bring into perspective the industry's current size. However, the permitted maximum management expenditure was not updated to match the new classification, which causes insurance to either overestimate or underestimate the management expenses, impacting negatively on policyholders. I therefore propose to amend the insurance regulations to provide for the maximum permitted expenditure for each category. Mr. Speaker, to effectively manage disaster response in a more coordinated manner, the government has developed a Disaster Risk Management Bill 2021. The objective of the bill is to better prepare and coordinate our disaster response, mitigation and recovery, as well as build resilience at both national and county levels. Given the urgency to provide a framework for disaster management at both levels of government, I appeal to this House to prioritize consideration of this bill. Mr. Speaker, climate change remains a key concern globally, given its adverse impact on economies. In this regard, government will strengthen capacity of national and county governments to plan, budget, implement, and monitor climate resilience investment. The government has partnered with development partners in the implementation of the proposed financing locally led climate action program and already mobilized funding of shilling 18 billion to support the initiative over the next 5 years. Through this program, we shall strengthen national and county government capacities to manage climate risk through support to the county climate change units. establishment of County Climate Change Fund, and development of climate change laws. Mr. Speaker, the government has also developed and approved the Sovereign Green Bond Framework, identified a portfolio of projects for consideration under the framework, and is prepared to issue the first sovereign green bond to raise capital to finance green projects under the economic recovery strategy. Mr. Speaker, as part of ease of doing business reforms to facilitate trade, we have finalized the development of maritime single window system under the TradeNet system. This will provide an harmonized and simplified ship-to-shore clearance procedures to maritime stakeholders. The maritime single window system will allow shipping agents in Kenya to electronically submit vessel pre-arrival and pre-departure declarations to government agencies. The maritime single window system is expected to replace the current system that is manual, decentralized, with unnecessary lengthy processes that affect the ship turnaround time and increase cost of port to Mombasa. I am pleased to note that this maritime single window system went live on 2nd June 2021. Mr. Speaker, the fiscal policy supporting the financial year 2021-22 and the medium-term budget is designed to support economic recovery and reduce fiscal deficit. The policy aims to mobilize revenues through the ongoing reforms in tax policy and administration. On the expenditure side, the focus will be to rationalize non-priority expenditures from the budget and align the resources to the Big Four agenda and the economic recovery strategy. Mr. Speaker, the execution of this budget for the financial 2020-21, the execution of the budget for the financial 2020-21 has progressed well, albeit with revenue underperformance and elevated expenditure associated with the adverse impact of COVID-19 pandemic. The shortfalls in revenues reflect weaker business environment and the impact of containment measures adopted in March 2020 following the outbreak of the pandemic. The government then responded to the pandemic by, among others, implementing tax relief measures in April 2020. These measures resulted in reduced collection of revenues, adversely impacting the implementation of the budget. Arising from these, the government in January 2021 made reversal of some of the relief measures, resulting in improvement in revenue collection. However, in March 2021, containment measures were introduced as a result of the third wave of the COVID-19. These measures lasted for only 1 month. Mr. Speaker, we remain committed to reducing the level of tax exemptions to create parity of treatment while also raising more revenues to fund social programs and reduce the fiscal deficit. In this budget, I will be proposing selected measures to expand the revenue base. Mr. Speaker, our tax policies are spread across various tax statutes, which are amended every year during the budget process, creating uncertainties in tax legislation. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, I have initiated a process of developing a national tax policy framework that will not only enhance administrative efficiency of the tax system, but provide consistency and certainty in tax administration and management of tax expenditure. A draft national tax policy is now ready and will be shared with stakeholders and members of the public in line with the dictates of our Constitution before forwarding to this House for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, total revenue including appropriation in aid and grants for the financial 2021-22 budget is projected at Kenya shilling 2.1 trillion, equivalent to 17% of GDP. Of this, total revenue is projected at Kenya shilling 2.04 trillion, equivalent to 16% of GDP, an increase in nominal terms from Kenya shilling 1.84 trillion in the financial year 2020-21. Ordinary revenue in the budget is projected at Kenya shilling 1.78 trillion, equivalent to 14.3% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, total expenditure in the financial year 2021-22 budget are projected at Kenya shilling 3.03 trillion, equivalent to 24.5% of GDP, from Kenya shilling 2.89 trillion, equivalent to 25.8% of GDP in the financial 2020-21 budget. Recurrent expenditure will amount to Kenya shilling 2 trillion or 16.2% of GDP. On the other hand, development expenditures, including foreign finance projects, allocations to contingency fund, and conditional transfers to county government are projected at Kenya shilling 669.6 billion. This funding is expected to accelerate completion of ongoing critical infrastructure projects in the country. Mr. Speaker, the expenditures I've outlined in this budget are consistent with those approved in the 2021 budget policy statement. Given the performance of revenue and the available levels of funding from our development partners, it is indeed necessary that we strictly adhere to the expenditure ceilings as presented so as to manage and stabilize public debt. Mr. Speaker, given the projected revenues and grants against the projected expenditure, the fiscal deficit for the financial year 2021-22 budget is projected at Kenyan shilling 929.7 billion, equivalent to 7.5% of GDP. This fiscal deficit is lower than Kenyan shilling 976.2 billion, equivalent to 8.7% of GDP in the financial year 2020-21 budget. The fiscal deficit in 2021-22 budget will be financed through net external financing of Kenyan shilling 271.2 billion, equivalent to 2.2% of GDP, and net domestic financing of Kenyan shilling 658.5 billion, equivalent to 5.3% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, our medium-term consolidation policy aims at reducing fiscal deficit progressively to Kenyan shilling 613.8 billion, equivalent to 3.6% of GDP by the year 2024-25. In this respect, we shall closely monitor the impact of COVID-19 to the economy and accordingly adjust the fiscal plan, including tax measures, to ensure that our development agenda remains sustainably funded. We shall carefully do this while limiting in-house adjustments of the budget for new projects except those of emergency nature. This will enhance certainty in the budget process and improve implementation of government programs and projects while adhering to the fiscal consolidation plan. Mr. Speaker, Kenya's public debt remains sustainable, but the debt carrying capacity has, however, declined. Financing of the fiscal deficit will continue to be strictly guided by the debt and borrowing policy and the annual medium-term debt strategy. Mr. Speaker, the government is implementing reforms to strengthen the institutional arrangements of public debt management by aligning the operations of the Public Debt Management Office to the PFM Act. In this respect, decisions of the day-to-day management and operations of the public debt management shall be undertaken by the Public Debt Management Office to enhance efficiency, strengthen accountability, and transparency. In addition, Mr. Speaker, during this calendar year, we have scheduled a set of debt management operations to lower costs and risk in our public debt portfolio to improve on the country's debt sustainability indicators and sovereign credit rating. I look forward to support of the August House for the amendment of public debt ceiling set in the Public Finance Management Act to enable implementation of debt management operations, including financing of the fiscal deficit. Mr. Speaker, with the desire to meet our development objectives, the gap between development needs and available resources has been expanding, underscoring the need for alternative financing mechanism. Last year, I highlighted the importance of public-private partnership as an option for closing the financing gap. The current Public-Private Partnership Act impairs expeditious financial closure of public-private partnership projects. To this effect, I undertook to transform the public-private partnership framework, which included review of legal, operational, and institutional structures. In this regard, I submitted the Public-Private Partnership Bill 2021 to this House for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the highlights of the government spending priorities in the coming financial year. In light of the revenue challenges and significant expenditure demands, spending in the financial 2021-22 will focus on critical areas with the highest impact on the well-being of Kenyans and support economic recovery. Therefore, the total program spending for the financial 2021-22 excluding redemptions, amounts to shilling 3.03 trillion. Mr. Speaker, the government will continue with the implementation of the economic stimulus program in the financial 2021-22. With targets to cushion vulnerable citizens and businesses, particularly those affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We have in this regard set aside shilling 23.1 billion in the financial 2021-22 budget for continuation of this program. Mr. Speaker, out of this, shilling 3 billion is earmarked for youth empowerment and employment creation under the Kazi Mtani program. Shilling 2.6 billion will go towards enhancing liquidity to businesses. Shilling 6.4 billion for improving educational outcomes. Shilling 6.9 billion for improving environment, water and sanitation facilities. Shilling 1.97 billion for improving agriculture and food security, as well as shilling 1.2 billion for recruitment of health workers. Mr. Speaker, I have also set aside shilling 1 billion for Kenya Wildlife Services to employ community scouts. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of priority programs under the Big Four agenda is a critical part to supporting sustainable economic recovery and accelerating employment creation. To realize this, Mr. Speaker, I have set aside shilling 142.1 billion to support the implementation of the Big Four agenda for both drivers and enabler projects. Mr. Speaker, the outbreak and rapid spread of the COVID-19 pandemic necessitated an urgent need to upscale implementation of universal health coverage to all our counties. Towards this end, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 121.1 billion to the health sector to support the various programs aimed at improving health outcomes. Mr. Speaker, of this amount, shilling 47.7 billion will fund activities and programs for the attainment of universal health coverage. Mr. Speaker, specific allocations for the various activities and programs includes shilling 8.7 billion for the Kenya COVID-19 Emergency Response Project, shilling 4.1 billion for free maternity health care, shilling 7.2 billion for the managed equipment services, as well as shilling 1.8 billion to provide medical cover for the elderly and severely disabled persons in our society. To lower cases of HIV, AIDS, and malaria and tuberculosis in the country, shilling 5.8 billion has been set aside. To enhance vaccines and immunization program, we've set aside shilling 3.9 billion. Further, Mr. Speaker, we propose an additional shilling 14.3 billion for purchase of COVID-19 vaccines and related expenditure in the course of the financial 2021-2022. Mr. Speaker, to enhance early diagnosis and management of cancer and reduce the burden of treatment among Kenyans, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 450 million for procurement of cyberknife radiotherapy equipment for Kenyatta University Teaching, Referral and Research Hospital. A further shilling 350 million has been set aside for the establishment of 2 cancer centers in Meru and Kakamega. Further, to improve health service delivery, shilling 15.2 billion has been set aside for Kenyatta National Hospital, shilling 11.5 billion for the Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, shilling 7.3 billion for the Kenya Medical Training Centers, shilling 2.8 billion for the Kenya Medical Research Institute, shilling 1.3 billion for the construction of Kenya National Hospital Vans and Pediatric Centers, shilling 863 million for procurement of family planning and reproductive health commodities, and shilling 600 million for procurement of equipment at the National Blood Transfusion Center. Mr. Speaker, affordable housing program is a pragmatic approach to addressing the housing problems, especially in the urban centers. To ensure success of this initiative, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 13.9 billion for the affordable housing program. The proposed allocation includes shilling 3.5 billion to Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company for establishment of the company's capital, as well as for own lending to primary mortgage lenders, shilling 8.2 billion for construction of affordable housing units, as well as shilling 500 million for construction of social housing units. Mr. Speaker, to support the Nairobi Metropolitan Services in reversing urban indignity in Nairobi County, City County, Kenya shilling 100 million has been set aside for the Nairobi Metropolitan Service Improvement Project and Kenya shilling 111.2 million for construction of footbridges. Other key allocations to the housing, urban development and public works sector includes Kenya shilling 3.5 billion for the Kenya Informal Settlement Improvement Project Phase 2, Kenya shilling 1 billion for construction of markets, Kenya shilling 1 billion for maintenance of government pool houses, Kenya shilling 750 million for construction of housing units for the National Police and Kenya Prison, Kenya shilling 700 million for the Kenya Urban Program, Kenya shilling 200 million for the Afri-City Summit, and Kenya shilling 45.6 million for the construction and completion of salt project buildings. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 700 million to support the Nairobi Bus Rapid Transport Project to offer an efficient and time-saving public transport. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to scale up reforms to encourage investments in the manufacturing sector to support and protect local industries. Despite the challenges brought about by COVID-19 pandemic, the fiscal and monetary policy measures that the government implemented significantly cushioned the sector. Mr. Speaker, to further promote local industries, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 20.5 billion under the various implementing ministries, departments and agencies. Out of these, Kenya shilling 2 billion will go to the Credit Guarantee Scheme to enhance access to affordable credit by micro, small and medium enterprises in the manufacturing sector. Kenya shilling 500 million will support development of various micro, small and medium enterprises in Kenya. And Kenya shilling 600 million for provision of finances to micro, small and medium enterprises through the Kenya Industrial Estate. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have set aside Kenya shilling 8.3 billion for Dongokundu Special Economic Zone, Kenya shilling 350 million for development of the Special Economic Zone, Textile Park in Naivasha, Kenani Leather Industrial Park, and at the River Textile Hub. Kenya shilling 90 million for the Free Port and Industrial Park Special Economic Zone in Mombasa. Other proposed allocations include Kenya shilling 130.2 million for the modernization of Rivertex, Kenya shilling 800 million for access roads to industrial park facilities. Mr. Speaker, in order to maximize the benefits from our cash crops, the government will make further investments towards the revival and enhancement of output. In this respect, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed 210.4 million for coffee industry revitalization, Kenya shilling 59.2 million for modernization of cooperative cotton ginneries, and Kenya shilling 50 million for cotton development as a subsidy and extension support. Mr. Speaker, to equip our youth with essential training and internship opportunities, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 1.4 billion for the Kenya Industrial and Entrepreneurship Project, Kenya shilling 800 million for the Kenya Youth Employment and Opportunities Project, Kenya shilling 448 million for industrial research laboratories, Kenya shilling 199.5 million for constituency industrial development centers. Mr. Speaker, in order to support our aspirations of attaining 100% food and nutrition security, I have set aside Kenya shilling 60 billion to relevant programs in this budget. Out of these, Kenya shilling 7 billion will go to the National Agricultural and Rural Inclusivity Project, Kenya shilling 2.7 billion for the Kenya Cereal Enhancement Program, Kenya shilling 1.8 billion has been proposed for the Emergency Locust Response, Kenya shilling 1.5 billion for the National Value Chain Support Program, Kenya shilling 1.5 billion for the Agricultural Sector Development Support Program 2, Kenya shilling 1.5 billion for the Small Scale Irrigation and Value Addition Project, and Kenya shilling 620 million for Food Security and Crop Diversification Project. Mr. Speaker, to improve livestock production, I propose Kenya shilling 3 billion for free disease holding ground in Lamu. I have also proposed Kenya shilling 488.1 million for the Regional Pastoral Livelihood Resilience Project, Kenya shilling 455 million for the Kenya Livestock Commercialization Program, shilling 163 million for the Livestock Value Chain Support Project, and shilling 156.2 million for livestock production under Big Four initiative. To enhance animal disease controls, I have set aside shilling 180 million for sustainable sustainable entrepreneurship-free areas in Kenya, shilling 131.4 million for the disease-free zones program, and shilling 60 million for modernization of foot and mouth disease laboratory and related activities. Mr. Speaker, the realization of the food and nutrition security also relies heavily on the sustainable utilization of the blue economy resources. To promote this, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 3.2 billion for the aquaculture business development project, shilling 3.4 billion for Kenya Marine Fisheries and Socioeconomic Development Project, shilling 2.1 billion for exploitation of living resources under the blue economy, shilling 1 billion for construction of fish processing plant in Lamu, shilling 290 million for coastal fisheries infrastructure development, shilling 326.6 million for rehabilitation of fish landing sites in Lamu in Lake Victoria, shilling 150 million for aquaculture technology development and innovation transfers, and shilling 195.3 million for development of blue economy initiatives. Mr. Speaker, in order to increase agricultural productivity and enhance resilience to climate change risk in targeted smallholder farming and pastoral communities in Kenya, I have set aside shilling 8.9 billion for the Climate Smart Agricultural Productivity Project, shilling 1.1 billion to enhance drought resilience and sustainable livelihood, shilling 178 million towards ending drought emergencies in Kenya, and in addition, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 529.5 million for the livestock and crop insurance scheme to reduce the vulnerabilities of Kenyan farmers to disease and natural disasters. Mr. Speaker, to ensure legitimacy of land ownership, I have set aside shilling 1.5 billion for processing and registration of title deeds, shilling 600 million for digitization of land registries, and shilling 105 million for construction of land registries. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations include shilling 100 million for revitalization of cotton industry, shilling 300 million for mitigation of fall armyworms, shilling 150 million for establishment of liquid nitrogen plant, shilling 200 million towards the embryo transfer project, and shilling 65 million for construction and refurbishment of the Leather Science Institute. Mr. Speaker, having highlighted the expenditures under the Economic Stimulus Program and the Big Four Agenda Initiative, allow me to turn to other proposed areas of expenditure in this budget that will support our path to sustainable and resilient economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to expand critical infrastructure in roads, rails, sea and airports to create an enabling environment for economic recovery and employment creation. Towards this end, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 182.5 billion, excluding the provisions I have set aside for the Economic Stimulus Program and the Big Four Agenda, to support construction of roads and bridges, as well as their rehabilitation and maintenance. Mr. Speaker, the rehabilitation of the meter gauge railway has improved interconnectivity and reduced traffic congestion on our roads. To continue improving public transport within the Nairobi metropolitan area, I have set aside shilling 1.3 billion for railway metro lines. Further, Mr. Speaker, to expand railway transport to the rest of the country, I have set aside shilling 27.2 billion for phase 2 of the standard gauge railway, shilling 2 billion for construction and rehabilitation of Naivasha Inland Container Depot, Malaba Line, shilling 2 billion for construction and rehabilitation of Riruta, Lenana, Ngong Railway, shilling 1.1 billion to complete rehabilitation of the Nairobi-Nanyuki meter gauge railway line, and shilling 700 million to complete rehabilitation of the Nakuru-Kisumu meter gauge railway. I have also set aside shilling 2 billion for the Kenya National Shipping Yard. Mr. Speaker, to support development of our ports, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 7.5 billion for the construction of the Mombasa Port Development Project, and Kenya shilling 7.5 billion for the LAPSSET project. Further, I have set aside Kenya shilling 128 million for insurance of ferries for the Likoni Channel, Kenya shilling 149 million for the maintenance of ferries and jetty headquarters, and Kenya shilling 603 million for construction and expansion of airports and airstrips. Mr. Speaker, to support production of reliable and affordable energy, I have set aside a total of Kenya shilling 71.9 billion, excluding the provision set aside under the Big Four initiatives. Out of these, Kenya shilling 50.1 billion will cater for transmission and distribution of power. Kenya shilling 11.3 billion for development of geothermal energy, Kenya shilling 6.4 billion for electrification of public facilities, and Kenya shilling 1.3 billion for development of nuclear energy, as well as exploration and mining of coal. Mr. Speaker, enhanced national security will create an enabling environment for business to thrive while aiding faster economic recovery. In this regard, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 294.5 billion to support operation of the National Police, Defense, and the National Intelligence Service. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocations include 119.8 billion for defense, Kenya shilling 42.5 billion for the National Intelligence Service, Kenya shilling 110.6 billion for policing and prison services, Kenya shilling 10.7 billion for leasing of police motor vehicles, and Kenya shilling 1 billion for police modernization program. Mr. Speaker, to step up war on crime and enhance support for administration of justice, I have set aside Kenya shilling 1.5 billion for the National Communication Surveillance System, and Kenya shilling 335 million to equip the National Forensic Laboratory. Mr. Speaker, other allocations include Kenya shilling 4.8 billion for medical insurance for the National Police Service and prisons, Kenya shilling 2.3 billion for the group personal insurance for the National Police and prisons, as well as Kenya shilling 1 billion for the National Integrated Identity Management System. Mr. Speaker, the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic last year disrupted in-person learning, leading to closure of schools for 9 months. The government is determined to recover the lost time while ensuring safe learning in our schools, colleges, and universities. In this respect, I have set aside a total of Kenya shilling 202.8 billion to support programs in the education sector. Mr. Speaker, out of the proposed allocation, Kenya shilling 12 billion will cater for free primary education, Kenya shilling 2.5 billion for recruitment of teachers, Kenya shilling 62.2 billion for free day secondary education, including insurance under the NHI for secondary school students, Kenya shilling 4 billion for examination fee waiver for all class 8 and Form 4 candidates, and Kenya shilling 1.8 billion for the school feeding program. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 1 billion for the competency-based curriculum, and Kenya shilling 420 million for the digital literacy program and ICT integration in our secondary schools. Mr. Speaker, to support infrastructure development and ensure safe learning in our schools, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 4.2 billion for primary and secondary schools infrastructure, and Kenya shilling 1.8 billion for construction and equipping of technical training institutes and vocational training centers. Further, Kenya shilling 1.1 billion has been set aside to increase access and improve the quality of technical and vocational education and training programs under the East African Skills Transformation and Regional Integration Project. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations to the education sector includes Kenya shilling 281.7 billion to Teacher Service Commission, Kenya shilling 76.3 billion for university education, Kenya shilling 15.8 billion to the Higher Education Loans Board, Kenya shilling 5.8 billion for Kenya Secondary School Education Quality Improvement Project, and Kenya shilling 5.2 billion capitation to TVET students. Further, Kenya shilling 745 million has been set aside for the technical vocational education training and entrepreneurship. Kenya shilling 633 million for promotion of youth employment and vocational training, and Kenya shilling 323 million for the National Research Fund. Mr. Speaker, when COVID-19 pandemic struck last year, we injected additional resources to the traditional cash transfer program to cushion the vulnerable in our society. To continue protecting this vulnerable segment, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 37.8 billion for social protection and affirmative actions in this budget. Mr. Speaker, out of this allocation, Kenya shilling 16.7 billion will cater for cash transfers to elderly persons, Kenya shilling 7.9 billion for orphans and vulnerable children, and Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for orphans for persons living with severe disabilities. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocation also includes Kenya shilling 4.1 billion for the Kenya Hunger Safety Net program, Kenya shilling 3.7 billion for the Kenya Development Response to Displacement Impact Project, and Kenya shilling 2.7 billion for the Kenya Social and Economic Inclusion Project. In addition, Kenya shilling 933.8 million will go to the Child Welfare Society of Kenya. Kenya shilling 400 million for the Presidential Mr. Speaker, the most pressing challenge in our country at the moment is lack of job opportunities for the youth. This has been exacerbated by the hard economic times following the adverse impact of COVID-19 pandemic. In order to empower the youth and support businesses owned by youth, women and persons living with disabilities, I have set aside Kenya shilling 10 billion for the National Youth Service, Kenya shilling 2.2 billion for the Kenya Youth Empowerment and Opportunities Project, Kenya shilling 454.1 million for the Youth Enterprise Development Fund, Kenya shilling 120 million for the Women Enterprise Fund, and Kenya shilling 62 million for the Youth Employment and Enterprise Fund. Mr. Speaker, to promote regional equity, reduce poverty, and enhance social development, I have set aside Kenya shilling 41.7 billion for the National Government Constituency Development Fund, Kenya shilling 2.1 billion for the National Government Affirmative Action Fund, as well as Kenya shilling 2.8 billion for the Equalization Fund to finance programs in the previously marginalized areas. Mr. Speaker, the rapid technological advancements portend great potential to catalyze economic recovery, create jobs, and improve lives and livelihood for Kenyans. To leverage on these technological gains, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 20.9 billion to fund initiatives in the information, communication, and technology sector. Specifically, these allocations include shilling 1 billion for government shared services, shilling 670 million for the digital literacy program. Further, to fast-track the development of the Konza Technopolis City, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 12 billion for the horizontal infrastructure phase 1, shilling 3.6 billion for Konza Data Center and Smart City Facility, shilling 400 million for construction of Konza Complex phase 1B, and shilling 200 million for development of Konza Technopolis Master Plan. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations include shilling 1.2 billion for maintenance and rehabilitation of National Optic Fiber Backbone Phase 2 expansion cable, shilling 1.1 billion for installation and commissioning of Eldoret Nadapal fiber optic cable, and shilling 463 million for maintenance and rehabilitation of last mile county connectivity network. Mr. Speaker, the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic and the ensuing containment measures significantly affected tourism, sports, culture, and arts sectors. To support recovery of these sectors, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 15 billion for the Sports, Arts, and Social Development Fund, shilling 1.7 billion for the Tourism Fund, shilling 643 million for the Tourism Promotion Fund, and shilling 90 million for refurbishment of the regional stadia. Mr. Speaker, to expand access to clean and adequate water for domestic and agriculture use, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 38 billion for water and sewerage infrastructure development, shilling 16.4 billion for water resource management, and shilling 10.8 billion for water storage and flood control. In addition, I have set aside shilling 10.5 billion for irrigation and land reclamation, and Kenya shilling 1.6 billion for water harvesting and storage for irrigation. Mr. Speaker, in order to support environment and water conservation, I have set aside Kenya shilling 9.6 billion for forest and water towers conservation, Kenya shilling 3.3 billion for environment management and protection, Kenya shilling 1.4 billion for meteorological services, and Kenya shilling 8.2 billion for wildlife conservation and management. Mr. Speaker, to enhance good governance and scale up fight against corruption, I have set aside Kenya shilling 3.3 billion for the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, Kenya shilling 3.2 billion for the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, and Kenya shilling 7.6 billion for the Criminal Investigation Services, and Kenya shilling 5.9 billion for the Office of the Auditor General. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, to enhance the oversight and legislative role of Parliament and access to justice, I propose to set aside Kenya shilling 37.9 billion for Parliament and Kenya shilling 17.9 billion for the judiciary. Mr. Speaker, acknowledging the place of devolution in our country, the county governments will receive Kenya shilling 370 billion as equitable share, representing 27.3% of the most recent audited and approved revenue raised nationally, in line with Article 2032 of the Constitution. In addition, the county governments will receive Kenya shilling 7.5 billion as conditional allocation from the national government share of revenue, and Kenya shilling 32.3 billion from development partners, bringing the total allocation to the county government for the financial year 2021-22 to Kenya shilling 409.9 billion. Indeed, this marks a substantial increase compared to Kenya shilling 353.2 billion allocation in the financial year 2020-21, a clear testimony of the government's commitment to supporting devolution. Mr. Speaker, in line with the High Court ruling on petition number 252 of 2016, directing that conditional and unconditional grants to county government should not be provided for under the Division of Revenue Act, the National Treasury is in consultation with other stakeholders is developing an appropriate legal instrument to be used to disburse additional conditional grants from the national government's share of revenue, as well as from proceeds of loans and grants to county governments. Mr. Speaker, in February 2020, the national government and the national city county government entered into a mutual agreement in line with Article 187 of the Constitution, through which the Nairobi City County transferred some of its functions to the national government. To ensure that the process of such a transfer of functions is fully reinforced in law, the National Treasury is developing a legislation to operationalize Articles 187 and 189 of the Constitution on transfer of functions and cooperation between the national and county governments. Mr. Speaker, to facilitate performance of the transferred functions by the Nairobi Metropolitan Services, I propose to allocate Kenya shilling 27.2 billion, which will comprise 18 billion for recurrent expenditure and Kenya shilling 9.2 billion for development expenditure. Mr. Speaker, to support county governments' capacities to enhance their own source revenue and reduce our reliance on equitable share, the National Treasury rolled out a nationwide capacity building exercise for county governments on interventions contained in the national policy to support enhancement of county government own source revenue. Mr. Speaker, the policy proposes broadening of the revenue basis while enhancing counties' revenue administrative capacities. The policy further proposes legal framework to ensure that the county governments comply with Article 209(5) of the Constitution of Kenya when formulating their revenue-raising measures. In this regard, we resubmitted the County Government Revenue-Raising Process Bill 2020 to this House in early 2020 for consideration. It is my hope that this bill will get necessary priority and approval. Further, Mr. Speaker, the government, through a multi-agency task force, has reviewed existing revenue management systems with a view to deploying one integrated county revenue management system for use by all the 47 county governments. The task force has completed its work and made appropriate recommendations for consideration by the two levels of government. Mr. Speaker, in order to provide basic services to the previously marginalized areas, As envisioned under the Constitution of Kenya, the concerned county governments had been allocated Kenyan shilling 6.8 billion under the Equalization Fund in the financial year 2021-22. Mr. Speaker, arising from the High Court ruling declaring the Equalization Fund guidelines unconstitutional, the National Treasury has developed the Public Finance Management Regulations 2021, which is now before this House for consideration. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn to taxation policy measures for the financial 2021-22 budget. I will begin by highlighting some of the key measures on custom duty as agreed during the East African Community Partner States pre-budget consultation in May 2021. I will then highlight some of the proposed amendments in the various tax laws relating to tax administration. These amendments are contained in the Finance Bill 2021 that I submitted to this House in April 2021 for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, the custom measures agreed by the East African Community Partner States and the proposed amendments in the Finance Bill 2021 are expected to generate an additional shilling 8.7 billion to the Exchequer for the financial 2021-22 budget. On custom duties, Mr. Speaker, during the East African Community pre-budget meeting, the ministers noted with concern the proliferation of cheap imports into the region and agreed on measures to protect locally manufactured products from unfair competition. The agreed measures under customs shall become effective from 1st July 2021. Mr. Speaker, to sustain the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, East African partner states have agreed to extend the duty-free importation window for raw materials and inputs for manufacture of masks, sanitizers, ventilators, and personal protective equipment remission for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, over the years, we have developed sufficient capacity for local manufacturing in the metal and allied subsector. This has generated job opportunities for our youth. However, the local manufacturers in this subsector continue to face stiff competition from cheaper imports. In this regard, and in order to continue protecting this subsector, the East African partner states agreed that imported iron and steel products shall continue attracting a duty rate of 25% with the corresponding specific rates for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, our farmers have been working hard to produce enough food to satisfy demand in the region. In particular, the sector has been meeting local demands for vegetable products, including potatoes, peas, and tomatoes, among others. To protect these farmers and the sector from cheap imports, the East African partner states agreed that vegetable products, including potatoes, peas, tomatoes, among others, shall attract a duty rate of 30% for 1 year as we await the finalization of the review of the East African Community Common External Tariff. Mr. Speaker, baby diapers are essential products and there is need to supply them at affordable prices. In this regard, last year we allowed manufacturers to access inputs for manufacture of baby diapers duty-free under duty remission scheme. This was meant to support Kenya's capacity to manufacture these products locally and create jobs. I am happy to note that many companies have responded to these incentives by increasing production. In order to nurture the growth of this industry and to continue sustaining the smiles of our babies, we have agreed to extend the duty-free importation of inputs for manufacture of baby diapers for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has sufficient raw material for manufacture of leather and footwear products. In support of this sector, the government has imposed a duty of 25% on imported products for manufacture of leather and footwear products. However, the sector continues to face competition from imported products due to undervaluation, thereby discouraging investments in the sector. To this effect, and in order to enhance incomes of our farmers, the East African Community Partner States have agreed to retain the import duty on imported products for manufacture of leather and footwear products at 25% and introduce a further specific duty rate to guard against undervaluation. Mr. Speaker, our micro, small, and medium enterprises that operate in the Jokali sector have continued to thrive, creating jobs and incomes to millions of families. Of particular interest is the furniture industry that has continued to attract local artisans who have been able to provide high-quality products. However, the industry continues to face stiff competition for imported finished products, sometimes of low quality. In this regard, the East African Community Partner States agreed to extend the applicable import duty on furniture at the rate of 35% for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, to give impetus to the affordable housing programs and facilitate availability of locally made roofing tiles at affordable prices, East African Community Partner States agreed to extend for a further 1 year the duty-free window for importing inputs for the manufacture of roofing tiles under the duty remission scheme. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the proposed amendments to the Income Tax Act. Mr. Speaker, to ensure equity and fairness in taxation, I have proposed to align the Income Tax Act with international best practice, through which introduction of provisions to prevent tax-based erosion and profit shifting, as well as restrict treaty benefits to curb tax evasion and avoidance. In this respect, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to expand the definition of the term permanent establishment so as to align the Income Tax Act with the international best practice. Mr. Speaker, the Finance Act 2020 introduced the digital service tax on income earned through the digital marketplace. However, the current tax provision do not cover all traders who use the digital service platform to transact their business. In this regard, I propose to expand the scope of the digital service tax to include income derived from internet and electronic networks. Further, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to align the rate of withholding tax on service fees in the extractive industry with that withheld in respect of management and professional services under the same sector. This will remove ambiguity and manipulation that result in leakage of tax revenue through characterization of income. Mr. Speaker, the private contribution made to insurance companies enjoy tax relief. However, the contribution to the National Health Insurance Fund do not enjoy this relief, despite the fund being the largest medical cover for majority of Kenyans under the universal health care. In order to support the contributors and encourage more non-registered persons to join the fund, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to allow the contribution to the National Health Insurance Fund qualify for tax relief at the rate of 15% of the contributed amount. Mr. Speaker, the Income Tax Act provides for a tax rebate to employers who offer internship to a minimum of 10 university graduates for a period of 1 year. These employers are allowed to deduct from their taxable income an extra 50% out of the cost of their apprenticeship emolument. In order to encourage employers to provide similar opportunities for TVET graduates, I propose an amendment to the Income Tax Act to include graduates of TVET institutions under the program. Accordingly, employers who engage a minimum of 10 graduates from both universities and TVET institutions will be allowed to deduct from their taxable income an extra 50% out of the cost of apprenticeship emolument. It is my hope that employers will take advantage of this incentive and give our young graduates from TVET institutions opportunities to gain practical experience so as to expand their employability. Mr. Speaker, last year, we revised the investment allowance regime under the second schedule to include Tax Act to introduce a new regime and retain the reducing balance method of deduction. However, under this method, deduction rarely gets exhausted. In order to cure this problem, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to replace the reducing balance method with the straight line method, which provides definite timeline for the deductions. This will provide certainty in taxation, ease tax administration, and enhance compliance. Mr. Speaker, we have noted that the current provisions in deductibility of interest allow some taxpayers to manipulate their balance sheets to reduce their tax liabilities. I therefore propose to replace the current thin capitalization rule that is based on debt to equity ratio with interest restrictions based on a ratio of earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Accordingly, any interest paid in excess of 30% of a company's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization will be disallowed in determination of taxable income. Mr. Speaker, in addition to being an international best practice, these measures has been found to be a better indicator of an economic performance of businesses, hence appropriate for determining the deductibility of interest on loans. This will guard against tax planning. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the proposed amendments under the Value Added Tax Act. In order to strengthen our healthcare system, make the cost of medicines affordable for Kenyans, and step up the fight against COVID-19 pandemic, I propose to introduce VAT exemption on medicaments used in our health facilities, including decongestants and food supplements. I propose to provide VAT exemptions to diagnostic and laboratory reagents, artificial respirators, including therapeutic respiration apparatus, breathing appliances, gas masks, as well as medical equipment and technologies used in the provision of medical care services. It is my hope that the suppliers of this medicament and medical equipment will reciprocate by making their prices affordable. Mr. Speaker, in order to promote local manufacturing of pharmaceutical products, I also propose to introduce VAT exemption on inputs used in the manufacture of medical ventilators and breathing appliances. This will enhance access to these products that are essential in management of the COVID-19 complications. Mr. Speaker, despite the huge potential for mineral and petroleum resources in the country, exploration and mining sector remains underdeveloped due to huge capital outlay requirements. In order to promote exploration and mining activities in the country, I propose to exempt from VAT goods for inclusive use in geothermal or oil exploration and mine prospecting. Mr. Speaker, to boost Kenya's effort on green energy, I propose to exempt from VAT equipment for generation of solar and wind energy. Mr. Speaker, to provide a transition clause to allow companies that had already signed power purchase agreements with government, I propose to amend the Value Added Tax Act to provide for a transition for the project that had been signed before April 2020, to enable them to continue benefiting from the VAT exemption in respect of taxable goods used in the project. This transition will expire upon completion of the said project. Mr. Speaker, in order to entrench the benefit of affordable housing, including specialized facilities like the student hostels, it is imperative to develop innovative financing alternatives. In this regard, I propose to exempt from VAT asset transfers in the real estate investment trust and asset-backed securities. This will deepen our capital markets by encouraging investors to participate in the real estate investment trust. Mr. Speaker, as I turn to the proposed amendments to the Excise Duty Act, the Finance Act 2020 removed excise duty on betting. The removal of this tax generated a lot of public debate, considering that betting has become widespread in our society, resulting in negative social effects. In this regard, I propose to reintroduce excise duty on betting at the rate of 20% of the amount wagered. Mr. Speaker, innovations in the tobacco industry has led to the introduction of new products such as nicotine pouches. These new or nicotine substitutes at a specific rate of shilling 5 per gram. This rate of excise duty is equivalent to the duty applicable to similar products under this Act. Mr. Speaker, to support the growth of service industry, particularly e-commerce, I propose to amend the Excise Duty Act so as to provide a rebate on the excise duty paid on internet data by a person who purchases the data in bulk for resale. Mr. Speaker, On the proposals to ease tax administration, Kenya ratified and deposited the multilateral convention for mutual administration assistance in tax matters with the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information on Tax Matters in July 2020. This convention is meant to facilitate automatic exchange of tax information between Kenya Revenue Authority and other jurisdictions. In this regard, I have proposed amendments to the Tax Procedure Act 2015 to facilitate the implementation of the convention. The convention will also enhance tax compliance by foreign taxpayers and act as a deterrent to tax evasion and illicit financial flows of other agencies to facilitate compliance with the provisions of the Digital Service Tax. Mr. Speaker, there are various ways that some unpatriotic individuals are using to evade payments of their tax liabilities. For example, we have noted in our iTax system perennial non-compliant taxpayers, defaulters, payment returns without payment, non-filers, nil filers, credit filers, stop filers, and decliners. In addition, there are traders and merchants who are not registered at all for tax purposes. Mr. Speaker, to gather information on tax malpractices, last year, we introduced the iWhistle, a platform that enables members of the public to volunteer information. As at the end of April 2021, the iWhistle platform had received a total of 502 whistles, and we thank the public for volunteering useful information. Considering the complexities and changing dynamics of intelligence gathering and to empower the Kenya Revenue Authority tax malpractices, I propose to amend the Kenya Revenue Authority Act to increase the maximum reward to a person who provides information leading to the identification of unassessed taxes from Kenya shilling 100,000 to Kenya shilling 500,000. Further, I propose to increase the reward to a person who provides information leading to recovery from maximum of Kenya shilling 2 million to Kenya shilling 5 million. This will encourage receipt of voluntary information to Kenya Revenue Authority, thereby bolstering tax compliance and revenue collections. Mr. Speaker, the Tax Appeals Tribunal has been hearing tax disputes and providing judgments at a very slow pace as the tribunal sits on a part-time basis. This has led to huge backlog of pending cases before the tribunal. Currently, there are 549 pending cases with a revenue implication of which I have submitted to this House for consideration. I urge the House to prioritize this bill so as to facilitate faster disposal of tax appeals to enable us boost revenue collection. Mr. Speaker, the processing of applications under the ESC duty remission scheme has been manual, time-consuming, and inefficient. In order to improve administration of the scheme, the government automated the process under the single window system and successfully rolled out in September 2020. Mr. Speaker, to strengthen the administration of tax exemptions process for official aid-funded projects, we have embarked on automation of the application and approval under the single window system and target to roll out in the next financial year. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I must state that the preparation of this budget required a lot of balancing. It has not been an easy process, considering the prevailing weak business